everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Hiba and I'm a fourth year medical student studying at the University of Manchester. In this video, I'm going to be talking you through how I think you should be preparing for your medical school interviews and giving you some tips on how you can be successful in the medical school interview before the actual interview day. I have 11 tips for you in this video, so please make sure you watch all the way up until the end. If that all sounds good to you, then please can I ask that you like this video and also subscribe to my channel. It really helps me out. Also, I just wanted to say I'm sorry if I look a bit dead in this video. I didn't get any time to put any makeup on, which I normally do for my YouTube videos, so please try and ignore that. But anyway, let's get started with the interview tips. So tip number one is, as soon as you get an interview, determine what type of interview format it is. Is it an MMI or is it a normal traditional panel interview? You'll usually be able to find this out in the interview email that you get, but it's really important that you determine what type of interview it actually is, because how you prepare for the interview is going to be highly dependent on whether it's an MMI or whether it's a traditional panel interview. The vast majority of universities will do an MMI, which I'm sure you're aware is multiple mini interviews, but some universities still actually do traditional panel interviews, so just make sure you know which type of interview you're going into so you can prepare for it accordingly. Tip number two is to research the university and the city. You need to make sure you research the university that you're interviewing at to show that you're committed to going to that university, even if it's not your first choice. You have to research it and show your research through your interview answers in a way that shows you're committed to going to that university and that university only. Make sure you really know the ins and outs of their university and their course. Make sure you know how they teach. Is it a PBL course? Is it a lecture-based course? What the structure is, whether there's any other aspects of learning integrated into it, because it's highly likely that they're going to ask you why you think you're suited to their university or why you want to do a PBL course over a lecture-based course, for example. Almost every university at some point throughout the interview will ask you why you chose their university or that city in specific to study medicine at. So make sure you have something prepared to say for why you want to spend the next 5 or 6 years of your life at their university, at their campus, in that particular city. Point number three is to know your personal statement inside out. Your personal statement isn't something that you should only concern yourself with just up to the point where you submit your application. If you've written it honestly, it should actually contain answers to many of the questions that the interviewers can ask you at the interview, because it's meant to be a reflection of why you want to do medicine and what qualities you have inside you that make you suited to medicine. Therefore, really make sure that you use your personal statement and your personal experiences that you've written about in your personal statement to help you prepare to answer the questions that they may ask you in the interviews, things like why we should choose you or why do you want to do medicine. Also remember that the interviewer is likely to have just read your personal statement just before you enter the station, so they can ask you any question about anything that you've written in your personal statement at any point throughout the interview. So for example, if you've written about a book in your personal statement, firstly make sure you've actually read that book, because they can ask you questions about it and the interviewer may also have read that book. But also list down a few talking points in your preparation that you can discuss about the book if the interviewer happens to ask you about it. Or in the same way, if you've written about a hobby, just in your preparation list down a few points that you can talk about your hobby that you may be able to discuss with the examiner if they bring that up and if they want to talk about it. Basically, just if you've mentioned anything in your personal statement, make sure you know it inside out, because it'll look really bad if you're asked about it and you're actually clueless about something that you've described in your personal statement. The fourth tip is to read good medical practice. This is a tip that lots of universities and medical schools actually recommend and even send in emails to their candidates to ask them to read before they come to the interview. It's a document that kind of outlines all of the qualities and traits that a doctor should have and the qualities and traits they should remember whilst they're working in hospital, whilst they're working in their day-to-day life as a doctor. It's a really long document, so you don't have to read all of it, but just go over it and look through it and try to get a gist of what it's really about. It's also a really good reference point for you to be able to see what qualities are going to be expected of you, and you can start to think about which qualities you already think you have or you already feel that you demonstrate. Often some of the qualities that are mentioned in good medical practice are also mentioned in your interviews, and sometimes there's a whole station just on good medical practice or a scenario where they want you to answer using a reference to the good medical practice. So it's really worth being familiar with this document before you go to your interview. Even if you aren't directly asked about this in any station of your interview, I'm 100% sure that in every station you'll be able to find a way to bring this into your answer and show that you have read up on good medical practice and are keeping those qualities in mind whilst answering the interview question. And that just shows the examiner that you've read about this even if they haven't asked you about it directly. Tip number 5 is to make yourself familiar with medical ethics. You're applying to medicine, so you already know this, but just to recap, medicine is a career in which doctors have to make quite difficult decisions in their day-to-day life, such as whether or not to treat a patient, whether or not to listen to a family member about treatment, etc. As someone who's not even a medical student yet and is only just applying to medicine, you definitely don't need to be an expert on any of these topics, so don't worry about that. But you do want to show the interviewer that you have an appreciation of medical ethics and that you're aware of the challenges that doctors need to face on a daily basis. For that reason, I'd recommend that you read up on at least the basics of medical ethics, so at least things like informed consent, capacity, and the 4 pillars of medical ethics. If you do have a little bit of extra time before your interviews and you do have slightly longer to prepare, I think it would also be worth having a brief look over Gaelic Competence, Fraser Competence, and lasting power of attorney, because I personally think that these are really easy concepts for interviewers to put into medical school interviews, because they're not that difficult to understand and they're easy to put into an interview scenario. Again, you really don't need to be an expert. Please don't feel overwhelmed after watching this video. It's just for you to have a brief look over, so that if a concept comes up in an interview, you're less likely to be blindsided and more likely to be able to recognize what they're talking about. Also, like with good medical practice, if you have an ethics station where none of these actual topics are being asked about, if you have the knowledge, you can still find a way to kind of slide these into your answers when you're giving an answer on an ethics station. And it will just show the interviewer that you're well prepared, that you've read up on medical ethics and you know what you're talking about. The 6th tip is to research on hot topics that are going on at the moment before you go to your interview. If you've been researching on how to prepare for your interview, you probably already know this, but it's really common for medical schools to ask you about your opinion on certain hot topics that are going on in the news or on social media or anything else at that moment in time. This is because firstly, it lets the examiner know that you keep up with medical news and you have a general interest in medicine, but it also lets them see how you reason and how you justify your opinions and how well you can give rationale for your answers. For example, back when I was interviewing around 4 years ago now, I was asked about the 7-day NHS and how I would feel if GPs were to be open on Saturdays and Sundays as well, because that was a topic that was going around in the news at the time, and I was asked to talk through the pros and cons of this. So I would suggest just making yourself familiar with some of the most popular topics that are going on in the news at the moment, and just thinking about them and forming an opinion about them, and also trying to understand what the points against your opinion could be. Don't worry about getting the right answer. There's never one single correct answer. All they want to see here is 1, that you actually know what you're talking about, and 2, that you're able to provide reasoning for your answer. This year, I think you should still particularly focus on things surrounding COVID, video consultations, telephone appointments, things like video MDT meetings, whether or not we should go back to having face-to-face consultations, etc. Tip number 7 is to write model answers to the common questions that you think you could be asked. So after doing all of the research that I've described, I personally would write model answers. For example, a really common question that medical schools can ask is, what's the difference between sympathy and empathy? And I remember writing a model answer for that and for all of the other things that I had researched. Some people don't really like writing full answers, and I'd say if you have a tendency to memorize, then maybe only write bullet points. Some people prefer that. But make sure you have written something down, because there's only so much you can hold in your head in such a short space of time. Also, if throughout your research you come across a really nice phrase that you feel like you want to use in your interview, write it down to prevent you from forgetting it. Tip number 8 is practice saying your answers, but don't memorize them. You want to practice saying your answers yourself in a relaxed, calm and conversational type manner. Interviews are really stressful and nerve-wracking, so it's going to be really easy for you to say your words too fast or speak too quietly or speak in the wrong tone of voice. So it's really important that you practice your speech, your speed of speech, and kind of your manner, and try and make sure you stay calm and relaxed. You also want to practice trying to limit the amount of time you say or or like or words like that. This is difficult. I do it a lot myself, and in the actual interview you will end up using these words sometimes, which is okay. It's nothing to panic about, but whilst you have the time, it's worth trying to reduce the amount of times you say these words, because it will make your answer sound more coherent and more logical if you give an answer without using words like in the middle. Tip number 9 is to do mock interviews, and by this I don't mean pay for an expensive mock interview that's only going to last one day, it's only going to be a single interview. I mean ask your friends, your family, teachers, any staff at your college to help you practice your interview and listen to your answers. Give them a list of commonly asked questions that you've researched, practice saying your answers, and then ask them to give you feedback on the content of your answers, your body language, on your tone of voice, on your speed of speaking. If you can get a teacher at a college to help you do the interview, or a friend who's also applying to medicine or dentistry, that would be even better, because they'll be able to give you better feedback over a sibling that doesn't really know anything about medicine, for example. But if siblings or parents are all you have, then honestly don't think twice about asking them to interview as well, because even their feedback is going to be really valuable. Tip number 10 is to practice roleplay. Roleplay stations have now become really common, especially in MMIs, and if you have more than one interview, I'd be really surprised if one of them didn't have a roleplay station. So in these stations, you're put in a scenario and asked to carry out a certain task. For example, talk to a patient or book an appointment or something like that. And the interviewer will just be assessing your behavior and your conduct and your communication skills. There's lots of potential roleplay stations that you can find online, so I highly suggest looking through these and practicing some of them, asking a friend or a family member to be the other person in the scenario and you being the medical student or the candidate. Roleplay can be really quite nerve-wracking and really awkward as well if you haven't practiced it before, so doing this beforehand will just let you know kind of what to expect in the interview. You'll also then be able to get some feedback on how you've performed in the roleplay station and how your communication was, because that's what the interview is going to be assessing in roleplay stations. Tip number 11 is to practice your timing. Whether you're in an MMI or if you're being assessed in a traditional panel type interview, time to answer each question is going to be limited. A typical MMI station lasts about 6 to 9 minutes depending on which university you're interviewing at, and this time also includes them actually asking you the question as well. So make sure, whether you're practicing yourself or in a mock interview with friends and family, that you're practicing under timed conditions and making sure that your answer isn't too long, because it's all well and good coming up with a really beautiful, well thought out answer to every question, but it lasts 20 minutes and you're never actually going to be able to say it in the interview. So try and shorten your answers down, make them concise, and practice in timed conditions. So that brings us to the end of the video. Those were 11 tips that I think will really help you prepare for your interview and will help you succeed even before the actual interview day. I'm going to be uploading a few more videos about interviews, tips on how to do well in online interviews, tips on how to do well on your actual interview day. So if you found this video helpful, make sure you subscribe so you can watch those videos as well. Please can I also ask that you like this video as well if you found it useful. If you have anything you want to ask, please just leave it in the comments. I reply to all of my comments, and if you have any suggestions of what you want to see or anything in particular that you want to see about interviews, then please also leave that in the comments as well. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.